Okay. It'll be a miracle if I do it. No, it'll be good. Okay, up here in the old treehouse, up behind my mom's place. I want to talk to you today about David Hume. What I'm doing is I guess it looks like I'm probably doing a short series of shorter videos about David Hume. I don't intend for this one to be super long. I want to talk about a particular chapter, a particular piece of writing by David Hume for a couple of reasons. Let me show you what it is. I look around my little thing here. I've got my Swifto little front thing. I'll show it to you. I want to talk about David Hume's chapter 10 of an Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding of Miracles. Chapter 10, one of the last two chapters of the inquiry that was held back, actually, because he was worried, actually, about having it be too controversial. Maybe he was worried, maybe he was not. But obviously, if he's going to make claims about miracles and about the epistemology of miracles, he knows that's going to be controversial. The reason that I like to use Hume and Hume's of miracles, and this chapter of miracles is really kind of, this is one of my sort of standard little classes on Hume, actually, to talk about this chapter, is because I think from something that seems kind of wild or miracles, the topic is miracles, we actually get an introduction, a pretty good introduction, I think, to some really key elements of David Hume's thought. So the reason that I like to go over the chapter of miracles, because it because it shows, I think, how systematic he is, and it's a good way to understand his larger theory, his larger system. All right, so let's take a look at some of these then. Okay. Right. Oh, there we go. Yes, the notorious Hume. There's a story about the great Johnson, the great lexicographer, and Boswell was his sort of his biographer and sort of right-hand man. And when Hume was on his deathbed, Johnson set Boswell up to get his deathbed confession. Of course, Hume sort of thought that was funny. I think that was maybe just the last joke between the two of them, because Samuel Johnson had this big shtick about how he looked down on Scottish people, and then Hume was a bit of a bomb thrower. He was a Scottish nationalist. They sort of had a status issue at that time, and so yes, he had a sort of attitude. David Hume was a very likable sort. Everyone said he was very muy amable. He was a very friendly sort of person, but he didn't mind if you got upset at his views. Sometimes he frames things in a funny way. And of course, that's why he's chosen this topic of miracles, and particularly the example of Christ's resurrection. Not only that, but in the chapter where it's clear enough that he's talking about Christ's resurrection, then he says, what if the queen was dead? And then 300 people said that they saw the queen come back to life. And he says, a sane person still wouldn't believe that that was true on the basis of 300 people's testimony versus the testimony of the whole rest of your life, that dead people don't come back to life. But again, in choosing his examples, he's deliberately, certainly being provocative, sort of playful that way. But the other thing I want to point out about it, I think this is probably the first time I'll say it, maybe say it again at the end, is notice this, that David Hume's not the village atheist. David Hume isn't just proclaiming that he doesn't believe in God. And David Hume, in fact, isn't even giving the most familiar argument, an argument that he would agree with and that he might give, but not here, which would be that the empirical scientist says we don't have any evidence for the existence of God. Where's the evidence? And another place, Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, by the way, Hume also deals to interesting depth with the argument from design, which is, after all, an argument that claims that there is empirical, that is observable evidence for the existence of God. And Hume does deal with that, but not here. He's making a different point in his chapter here of miracles. So that third bullet point, again, what Hume is not doing is saying, particularly, look, we don't have scientific evidence, so therefore we don't believe in God. He would endorse that argument. You think that argument's right, but he's giving another different kind of argument here. And that's why, fourth bullet point there on the slide, I like to teach it because it's a good way to get across Hume's larger ideas. That's why I think it's a good lesson. So here's what the argument is, just in a nutshell. Again, this is just Hume's of miracles on a stick. We have 2 more slides after this. We don't have to go real fast. So the classic define your terms, but ask yourselves whether there are other ways of defining the terms. Hume says, well, okay, you mean by miracle an exception to the laws of nature. You can elaborate that argument. You can talk about whether that requires divine intervention or just some sort of suspension of the laws of nature, if you want, and that might matter. What are laws of nature? And by the way, I mean, it's also been pointed out that you had a discussion of miracles in ancient literature where it's not obvious that there was a sort of empirical standard against which miracles were defined. So, and I think that's a good point. It's not a point that's helpful for, my sympathies, but it's an interesting point, I think. Anyway, so what are laws of nature? Well, Hume says they're very well-defined beliefs. Notice he's not a science group. He doesn't say, well, the laws of nature are set down by the godlike scientists. That's not Hume at all. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in the next slide as well. But right now, we just want to get out what exactly the argument is, and what the conclusion of the argument is. Because the conclusion of Hume's argument here is that you don't believe in miracles, which is a little bit of a stronger argument than that Hume, doesn't believe in them. So laws of nature, what are they? Well, very well confirmed beliefs. Why don't we take as our paradigmatic one, say the law of gravity. So that's a law of nature, right? A law of gravity. And Newton even says it's a law. As Hume knows perfectly well, by the way, because Newton published the Principia in 1689, and Hume is writing this in the 1730s and 1740s, very acutely aware, in fact, of the new science. And so, what's gravity then, according to Newton? Newton gave a mathematical description of gravity. That is a mathematical proposition that will give you the relationship between any 2 massy objects. So, and that's fine with Hume, but what have you got? You've got, again, very, very well confirmed expectations. What does that mean? That means it's really, really solid that the law of gravity has always been enforced in all the experiences that you've had. That's why the law of gravity is a good example, because no matter what, it's always been that the law of gravity has been rigidly confirmed, as many of the rock climber will attest. So, so that's a good example of it. Now, so you say, now there's a law of gravity. I mean, come on, there's a law. Newton can even give us the mathematical description of the law. So surely it's really a law of nature, right? It's something that nomological, as a law-like character that nature has, involves this law of gravity. He says, well, be that as it may, as a human being, the fact is that in terms of logical proof, the best that you can do is say that you don't really have a logical proof. Because it's the same reason that you don't have a logical proof that the sun is going to rise in the east again in the morning tomorrow, because that's not how you know things like that. And this is all aimed, by the way, at Descartes. Hume is systematically showing that Descartes is wrong in just about every single case when he says that certainty is a matter of logical certainty. And if we don't have logical certainty, then we can't say that we know something. And Hume's argument is that that's one of his ways of saying it, is that that's just a really bizarre way of defining certainty. That's the rationalist way, but rational isn't necessarily reasonable. Reasonable says, well, I can reasonably expect, I can't prove that the sun's going to rise in the east tomorrow morning, and I can't prove that gravity is going to be in effect 1 minute from now, but I sure do think I know them, and I don't think that I'm wrong when I say that I know them. I don't think some philosopher has blown my mind and shown me they don't really know those things. I think it sounds like somebody has a definition of knowledge that is a wacky definition of knowledge. And that's Hume's diagnosis of the problem here too. He says that when you believe something, you have developed an expectation. It is probabilistic. The big difference between Descartes and Hume is that Descartes thinks that you're certain when you have a probability of 1. You've shown it's logically necessary for it to be true. And Hume says all knowledge is probabilistic, exactly what Descartes doesn't want to be true. So this is the argument, right? The argument is an argument from Hume's psychology, from Hume's theory of learning. Hume is saying the way that human beings learn things is by regularities of experience. They become habituated to regularities of experience. It is an empiricist behaviorist psychology. Behaviorism, the psychology that we know of behaviorism, comes down from this empiricist tradition of David Hume. It falls straight out of what he says, because he says for a statement to be meaningful, you have to be able to look at what the observations might be, right, that would sort of fill it out. So then, well, there's the argument, right? So it's a by definition argument. Actually, this, I think, a logical argument to the extent that an argument by definition is a particular kind of argument. I said at the beginning, you know, if you have other ways of defining these words, you're welcome to it. They don't look like particularly obscure or idiosyncratic definitions to me. The question is he right to say that what beliefs really are expectations based on habituation and past experience? Okay, so, and there's a lot to say about that, obviously, as you all know, because a lot of you are psychology and social science people, and you're well aware of the debates in this area, which are numerous and lively. A couple things to notice about the argument here. Already, I think you can see what I was saying at the beginning, that one of the things that's valuable about it is it's a way to see what Hume's psychology in general is like, what his theory of learning really is. But let's go through a couple of other, let's stop and smell the roses here and go through a couple of other things. The thing I was talking about before, that first bullet point on the slide that you see there, yeah, Hume would certainly agree that there's an argument from a lack of physical evidence. The empiricist has a certain standard of evidence, and it looks like a lot of theists, people who argue that God exists, don't meet that standard. Of course, you know, you don't have to meet somebody else's standard of evidence, you know, it's an argument. And that's real, and, you know, I mean, Hume would say that's a good argument. So would I. I guess I would think that as philosophers, the two of us might ask some more questions about physical evidence of what and so on. But yeah, I mean, roughly speaking, naturalist, right? But that's not it exactly. He's got a somewhat subtler argument here. As I said, he's not a science groupie. Look at that second bullet point on the slide there. He says, and this is why some people think he's a skeptic. I don't think he's a skeptic, and we'll deal with that. We deal with that a couple different places, I think, in these videos. But what he does think is that, look, all knowledge is based on experience. So no matter what the claims are that you're making, what you're really telling us are about some regularities that you have experienced, then to the point where you have developed expectations. You know, that's the view. And that's not what we would call a realist or objectivist view of science. That doesn't give science any particularly privileged view at all. Just notice that Hume's philosophy of science is just extension of his general epistemology, his general theory of knowledge. Hume doesn't think there's any difference between scientific method and the way that ordinary people learn things, because he thinks all human beings learn the same way. It's only that people we call scientists are people who have very well-developed and well-refined ways of controlling their observations and dealing with their information, their data, and so on. And I agree that that's true. That is, I don't think you can make any distinction between science and non-science epistemologically, really. There isn't any magic there. So bottom line for the second bullet point there, though, right? Hume isn't he isn't someone who worships science or makes a religion out of science or thinks that science is the end of epistemology. In fact, what he says is that what you can talk about is experience. Some people read that as a skeptical thing to say. The way I read that is he says, look, you can't really coherently talk about anything that it refers in no way to any experience you've had, and that your experience is referred to in no way. It's not going to be a coherent thing to say. Well, anyway, the third bullet point is another thing to notice, though. The first thing to notice is, no, he's not a science fanatic. He's not a scientific realist, particularly. To say that Hume's a scientist, for Hume, if you say you're a realist, you say the desk is, the table is here and it's really real. That part on the end, the and it's really real part, is just some empty metaphysical rhetoric of some sort, because it doesn't add anything to what you're saying when you say the table is here. The table is here, the table exists. That sounds kind of heavier than saying that the table is here, but it doesn't really say anything different. That's the view. So, all right. And then the third bullet point, he's not, as I say, the village atheist. He's not just getting in your face and telling you God is dead, yeah. He's got his arguments. But his argument isn't, like I say, just that old hayseed argument about, well, show me where God exists, dig a hole and tie a camera and get a camera and get a picture of the old boy when he falls down at night. No, his argument is a lot subtler than that. We saw already, his argument comes from his psychology, his idea, and it is his idea, and he is quite sincere, of course, that this is how people come to form beliefs. What beliefs are our expectations, and they can only be based on past experience, so he says. And that means that you, not someone else, not Hume or me or one, right? No, whoever you may be, what Hume is telling you here is that if you give him that we get beliefs by habituation, well, then if you do, then the fact of the matter is that you don't believe in miracles either. Remember, it's an argument about miracles. It's not an argument about the existence of God. I find sometimes I start to drift off in that direction, but yeah, I have to keep focused on what the argument is really saying, right? You see how it's an argument from definition. A miracle is an exception to the laws of nature. And the last one, just kind of thinking out loud, I mean, another thing to notice, Hume doesn't think you can just think whatever you want. See, Hume's also, the empiricist is not a relativist. Hume says you have these experiences. It's a kind of a deep question. It's sort of a Buddhist question. Are these experiences happening to you, or what exactly is your relationship to these experiences? A lot of people in this empiricist tradition, and there's an empiricist reading of Buddhism too, by the way, if you're interested, would say that oneself just sort of is these experiences, that at the end of the day, it's rather difficult to disentangle your sense of self from your sense of all these experiences that you're having and that you have had. So in any event, I mean, we can think of, we want to be open-minded. So we think, well, miracles, sure, of course there could be miracles. And anyway, what do we know? And, as if, well, when you say, well, of course there could be miracles because what do we know? And you're very humble and open-minded about that, because what do we know? There could be miracles. But notice the thing is that isn't that there's some priestly caste who have some theories that they got from the great big idol with the golden head. It's you who have expectation. It's you who think that gravity is going to continue to be in effect. It's you who say that people can't rise from the dead, not some arrogant intellectual someplace who's making stuff up. No, you believe what you do because of the experiences that you've had. That's the claim. Okay, and that means you don't believe in miracles if you define a miracle as an exception to the laws of nature. All right, so you get it. and why it's valuable. Last thing then, again, to get to step back to look at it more widely and look at what Hume says about miracles within the context of his larger theory, and using what he says about miracles to make sense of his larger theory. Inductive inference from the bottom up, that is from all of the little experiences, that's a big set of experiences. And then there's a production of knowledge upwards to the generalization as an inductive inference. We have another video here where we talk about that, the difference between that and deductive inference, like Sherlock Holmes does, where he knows all the information and he can identify a member of the set. And so that's induction versus deduction. And we'll talk about that. It's not as hard as it. Don't worry about the fancy words. It's really pretty basic. But in any event, the empiricist, like David Hume, thinks that knowledge is produced by inductive inference. That is, we have this big set of all of our experiences, and we expect the next experience to be like all the other members of the relevantly similar set. Now you have mathematical and logical proofs. Are they really examples of knowledge? That's a lively discussion. As you know, if you've been working with me at all, you know that I have a lot of strongly empiricist sentiments, but I do think it's when we get to the issue of mathematics and its status, both epistemologically and metaphysically, that I think there are some issues that are real issues that I don't see a knockdown empiricist dealing with. But that, philosophy wouldn't be interesting if everything seemed to be so clear. It doesn't seem that clear to me. But in any event, putting this issue of the status of the mathematical and logical proofs aside, contra Descartes, and this is a very systematic thing about Hume. Hume is systematically going through and showing that all of these relevant examples, Descartes' theory is not correct. We don't have logical certainty for just about any beliefs at all, which then the outcome, which most people reading the Meditations come away with, is, oh, and we don't know anything at all. And Hume, the empiricist, wait a second, we know lots of things. So that's not where something's gone wrong. I don't have any problem with the way I'm using the verb to know, Mr. Philosopher, Mr. Rationalist, Mr. Descartes. So, all right. So finally then, that last one, now this is really, you want to do a little bit of introspection. You want to ask yourself some questions. Hume chose the example of a dead person coming back to life. He did it for somewhat symbolic reasons, because he wanted to refer to Christianity and one of its central myths. And he even went so far as to mention the Queen coming back to life, in case there was still any unoffended people out there. So, okay, but maybe can we put that aside and think about, and I don't mean to be creepy about it or anything, but let's be real. Have you ever seen a dead person? Do you know? The question is, can a dead person come back to life? Rather, that's not exactly the question. Actually, that's not the question. I'm sorry. The question is this. The question is, if one person came in and told you that they saw a dead person come back to life, we're pretty sure, aren't we, that you wouldn't believe it? Do you think I'd believe it if someone walked in and told me that they just saw a dead person come? I was at the Tamboo Tavern, and this guy told us that his girlfriend turned into a werewolf. I asked him for details, and he didn't want to talk about it, which I thought was, why mention it if you don't want to talk about it? But, be for real, look, a dead person, I know it's your religion that the dead person can be, that's fine. That's okay. That's all right. But this is real. No, not JC, a person, right? How hard would it be for you to be convinced that a dead person came back to life, a really dead person, by second hand? If a delegation of 10 people came and told you that a dead person came back to life, would you believe that? I wouldn't at all. but it's a reality check. I mean, who cares what I say? Yeah, what do you say? All right. So anyway, Hume's argument on miracles, as I say, it's kind of nice and provocative because it's about miracles and everything, but it also is an old lesson of mine. I've been explaining as long as I've been explaining Hume to people, um, which is probably longer than Hume thinks I should. But in any event, that's another story as well. I don't believe we have any. No, we do not. Certainly not. All righty then. So yeah, and so not only is it a kind of a fun bit of argument, but also one maybe that helps to illuminate David Hume a little bit and help us understand Hume a little bit. All righty then. I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye. It's